And good morning. Well, I don't know what time it is where you are. It's morning here now. Um, so this is the first installment of a talk on John Locke. We're going to go through the second discourse, or second treatise. And this is the famous one. This is the one everybody reads. Nobody ever reads the first treatise. Not true, actually. Scholars read the first treatise, and you're welcome to do that if you want. If you really want to read a whole lot of biblical criticism, and you can follow along with that. Some people can, some people can't. That's fine. More than anybody else, Locke is America's political philosopher, political theorist. He's the one who inspired Jefferson when he was writing the Declaration of Independence. He was the one who kind of set out the criteria for legitimate government. And this is the thing. This is the kind of the weird thing about Locke and Hobbes both, right? I mean, Locke makes it clear that for modern political thought, the very presence of social life emerges as a problem. Why do we have society? Why do we have politics? What's the purpose of it? What's it for? And so the specifically political form of that is not what is good government, which it is for the classics, but what is legitimate government, okay? So Locke is asking, how can government become legitimate? Americans took that question, right, and applied it in a very Lockean way, in a very Lockean framework to the discussion of government power with respect to Britain and with respect to colonial charters and all of that. So this is kind of how it was that Locke became our guy. And so a lot of this is going to sound familiar. There are things in here later on that are directly lifted for the Declaration of Independence. So, you know, yes, it will sound familiar. Don't be lulled by that, okay? Be critical, be thoughtful, and be prepared to make yourself stand back and ask hard questions about this, because Locke is doing some weird stuff. So all of this comes in, you know, with this idea that Hobbes had promoted, right? This change from humanity as maker, change from humanity as knower to humanity as maker. And so for Hobbes and Locke, both of them begin with cognitive, what I call cognitive individualism, right? You experience the world in your own way, and I experience the world in my way, and together we construct what reality is. But none of us independently has a handle, a correct handle on what reality really is, whatever it really is. So the truth, if there is truth, is in the observer, not in the things. The value is in the valuer, not in the thing. And so you can see why money becomes then a nice metaphor for this, because money is a way of putting a value on something that is sort of intersubjective, right? We both agree that a dollar has a certain purchasing power. So where we're going with Locke, and you see this a little bit, you're starting to see this in chapter 5 here, where we're going with Locke is that agreement or contract or compact or something, whatever you call it, but that's the only way to create common things. For the classics, common is the starting point, right? And we need to, the human passions and the human mistakes take us away from what's common, right? For Hobbes and Locke, the individual is the starting point, and in order to get to a common place, we need to agree. We need to work on it. We need to move in that direction. Okay, so, I mean, think about it this way, right? You can only understand what a shortstop is if you understand what baseball is and what the rules are and sort of how the game is played. For the classics, right, understanding that game is understanding sort of what is important about the particular roles that people play in the society. For the moderns, right, everybody is capable of playing any role, and so whatever we agree on, then whatever compact we come to, that's what creates the common endeavor, and that's what gives each of us our roles, if that makes sense, right? For the classics, it comes from nature, and for the moderns, it comes from agreement. Now, one thing to notice, though, is that for Locke kind of turns upside down Hobbes's account of this, right? Remember, this is on 619 in our book, right? The paragraph that ends the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. But remember what's gone on before that, right? So before that in the paragraph, in such condition, there is no place for industry because the fruit thereof is uncertain and consequently no culture of the earth. No culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge, right? No account of time, no arts, no letters, no society. In other words, for Hobbes, political society is the first thing that happens. It's the first technology that we adopt in order to create other technologies that help us to master what's going on in the earth. For Locke, government isn't the first technology, government is the last technology, right? That we develop a whole lot of other things first. And so that's what we're going to see today and to some degree next time when we look at these first chapters of the second treatise. Okay, so the second treatise is second because there was a first treatise. Locke tells us at the very beginning, in that first sentence, right, what fate has otherwise disposed of the papers that should have filled up the middle and were more than all the rest, it is not worthwhile to tell thee. We don't know exactly what he's talking about there. We don't have a record. I mean, apparently the manuscript of the treatises on government was completely lost when Hobbes had to, or when Locke, sorry, they look the same. When Locke had to flee to go to Holland, but there is a theory by Michael Zugert, one of my professors, who thinks that it's the essay concerning human understanding, and he, who knows. What's important to know is that the first treatise demolishes Robert Filmer's claim in the book Patriarcha of divine right of kings. And Locke, using extensive passages from the Bible, basically proves that that's not tenable. Okay. And so in this beginning, in the preface here, this is what he's talking about. And in the first chapter, right, this is why I say that government, the existence of government, the existence of organized society emerges as a problem, right? So divine right is just out the window. Locke says it's just not acceptable, and it's not, even on the Bible, you can't demonstrate that. That leaves us with only a couple of alternatives, right? Where does government come from then? And so Hobbes, I keep doing that, I'm sorry, I mean Locke. So Locke says in chapter 1, or in section 1 here of chapter 1, right? So that he that will not give just occasion to think that all government in the world is the product only of force and violence, right? So unless we find some way, some rational, logical way of forming government, that leaves us only with the alternative that government is a product of force. And that seems unacceptable, right? That just doesn't seem right. So he has to set out to find another ground or another origin of government. Because he sees this binary definition, right? We can agree on something, or it's force, and that's it. So, and at the end of chapter 1, section 3 there, political power I take to mean what? Right? A right of making laws and penalties of death, and consequently all less penalties for the regulating and preserving of property, of course, number 1, et cetera, right? And all this only for the public good. So Locke never really defines the public good for us, but understand that political power is designed to be used for the public good. What does that mean? We will raise that question again and again as we go through this. It probably means something like, we could say the greatest good of the greatest number. Maybe it's additive. Maybe you add everybody's individual good together. Maybe it's a collective thing that all share in. We don't know. Locke doesn't give us any really good definition of it. So something to think about and something to keep your eyes open for. Now, at the beginning of chapter 2, section 4, how do you understand political power correctly? So to understand it and derive it from its original, what does he say? We must consider what state all men are naturally in, and that is a state of perfect freedom to organize their actions and dispose of their possessions and persons as they think fit within the bounds of the law of nature. That verb there is an interesting one. All men are naturally in, right? It's not past tense. It is present, which means that even though you live in settled political society, you still are free, perfectly free, to order your actions and dispose of your possessions as you see fit. So Locke's doctrine here is a little bit more open-ended, right, than you might give him credit for. And this is something that's important, right? Because it means, in principle, that society can be dissolved and founded at any time. And that's useful. Okay? Now, the counterpart of that freedom, right, is a state, as he says in the second paragraph, of equality. So free and equal. And for Locke, these two things are inseparable. Okay? We're free because we have no superior in nature or designated by God or in any other way, right? We're equal in that we're all equally free. So we're free of any imposition on us, and we're free of all others, okay? So it is a level. We are free and equal, period. And that's the beginning point. That's a beginning of our understanding of what government is and how it works. So this understanding that we've got, people sometimes have a problem talking about equality and what exactly does that mean. But I think that you need to understand from Locke that this is how it goes. You know, free and equal, not subject to some superior. I mean, that's really the context in which he is debating it. Okay. Sorry. So talks about Hooker, right? And the state of nature, he says, this is in section 6, it's a state of liberty, but not a state of license. Meaning that there is and this is, people have really, I mean, dissertations and books have been written about Locke on the law of nature. And what does that mean? He goes on to say the state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone. But we know that through reason. And this Locke is perfectly in accord with the classics, right? We know this through reason. And what reason leads him to conclude, and you can look forward to Kant here if you want. Reason, he says, which is that law, teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. You think about the reasoning there, right? So we don't have any superior by nature. We also have no cause, no justification for invading somebody else in their possessions or in their person. And so, and that's, again, that's what equality means, right? That's what equality means. So if you think through the terms, you have to come up with this. But a lot of people are wrong. And so that's a problem. And it's a problem because, as he says in section 7, the execution of the law of nature is put into every man's hand. So for Locke, this is just exactly the kind of state of war that Hobbes was talking about. Locke is a little bit gentler about it than Hobbes was, but not a lot, right? Right. Every person has the right, has what's called the executive power of the law of nature. And you're only supposed to do it, as he says in section 8, only to retribute him so far as calm reason and conscience dictate, which is what is proportionate to his transgression, which is so much as may serve for reparation and restraint. So in other words, you want to make sure that anybody who commits a fault has repaired the damage and is restrained from doing it again. That's the purpose of a criminal justice system. And he has some explanation of how you can punish someone who is not from your country and so forth. And again, this makes sense, right? In a state of nature, we have no reason to think that anyone has a greater power of enforcement. Nobody's designated, certainly, to have the enforcement power. So nobody has a greater power to enforce than anybody else. In chapter 13, or in section 13, this is on 715, right? In beginning of section 13, Locke calls it a strange doctrine, right? In the state of nature, everyone has the executive power of the law of nature. Locke says, well, why would that be a strange doctrine? Well, I doubt not, but it will be objected that it is unreasonable for men to be judges in their own cases. Well, of course it is. Locke knows that, right? Um, so, but, sorry, not so, but for Locke, this is not a reason to say that God has appointed government, right? The fact that men will judge badly in their own cases shouldn't make us kind of run towards absolutism, right? What we need to do then is come to a kind of sober and calm agreement about what kind of government ought to do. Does that make sense? I hope so. Yeah, so again, for Locke, government is coming into being outside of society. Locke is the first one who really does a clear job. In Hobbes, it's a little murky, and I'm not sure Hobbes really fully does it, right? Like I say, for Hobbes, government comes first. In that sense, Hobbes agrees with the classics that government is necessary for human beings in order to thrive, prosper, have science, all of that stuff. For Locke, much occurs outside of government. And if you look right at chapter 5, at the end of this reading, he's talking about the development of money. Money develops before government, right? So Locke is the first one to give us a clear doctrine of the separation of the state, on the one hand, the political authority, and society. And for Locke, society begins first. And this is what he's talking about. So when he's talking about executive power of the law of nature, all of this stuff, right, in the first couple of chapters, this is all happening before there is any government at all. But human beings, Locke thinks, are sufficiently rational to make these choices and make these decisions for themselves. And so it's not a problem that we've got government, or sorry, we've got society that exists without government. That's possible to do. It's not desirable, but it is possible, okay? Okay. So the state of war, then, Locke, again, is drawing a clear difference between himself on the one hand and Hobbes on the other, right? For Hobbes, anything outside of a situation where there is government is a state of war. For Locke, it's only when, as he says, he who attempts to get another man, this is section 17, he who attempts to get another man into his absolute power does thereby put himself into a state of war. Okay, so there can be many individual states of war. It's not a general condition of humankind. Look at section 19, it's on 717. Men living together according to reason without a common superior on earth with authority to judge between them is properly the state of nature, right? So we can do it. We can do it on our own. We don't need this common judge. It's helpful, but it's not necessary. But, Locke goes on to say, force or a declared design of force upon the person of another, where there is no common superior on earth to appeal to for relief, is the state of war. So that's this is what this is the distinction that Locke makes from Hobbes. He goes on to say, right, lack of a common judge with authority is the very last section of, or sentence of section 19. Lack of a common judge with authority puts all men in a state of nature. Force without right upon a man's person makes a state of war both where there is and is not a common judge. right? So that's interesting, right? Because that means that even if there is a common judge, you can have a state of war. So a highway robber, for example, which was very common in Britain, of course, at this time. Highway robbery. If there's no cop around, you have the right of defending yourself, and you should take advantage. You're supposed to take it. Locke thinks you're supposed to take advantage of that. Okay. Again, if there are questions about that, ask in the forum. Please post to the forum. Chapter 4 is slavery, and again, that's as he says, the perfect condition of slavery. This is section 24, page 718. Is nothing else but the state of war continued between a lawful conqueror and a captive. So if I conquer you in war, I get to use you. I get to use your power. And I may not, however, take your life. That is unjust. You have every right to defend yourself if I try to take your life. So that's important. Now, chapter 5. This is kind of the main thing here, and I may stop this in a minute because I've got to go and take it up later. But chapter 5. In chapter 5, Locke solves a problem that has dogged everybody who has ever thought about political theory, and that is, where does property come from? I own my house. When you buy a house, you have to do a title, what's called a title search, and make sure that there are no claims on it from past owners, right? That every owner's title, every previous owner's title has been extinguished in some way, and there's no dower rights or things like that. Well, in Pennsylvania, where do you go? I mean, we bought this house from another Juniata professor family. They bought it from a Juniata professor family who bought it from a teacher or something, I think. So we know, right, back to when the house was constructed, who bought it. Well, where did the land come from, right? Well, the land was here. Well, who owned the land? Well, you can go back and back and back. And eventually you have to get to a grant from the king to William Penn. Well, where did the king get it? He took it, right? So, I mean, you look at any history of property, and it becomes pretty clear that the original ownership of any piece of property is probably theft or crime of some sort. And as a result, very few people talked about it in the history of political thought. Cicero tries to talk about it some in De Officiis, and I've written about that. But it's what Cicero does with it is unsatisfactory. Plato and Aristotle really don't talk about it at all. From their point of view, it is, well, probably justified by war. It is a matter of community decision, right? Who's designated as owning which piece of property. And so the justice of it is wrapped up in the justice of the community. For Locke, this is independent. Remember, government hasn't been established yet. So how does property come to exist in nature. So we will start with that the next time. And for now, I will say bye.